have to watch a clock. I don't even have to watch a clock.
Hello. Thank you so much for listening to the Bold Moves podcast. I am the host, Mandy Bryce, and this is episode 197. We're really creeping up on episode number 200, and I am super excited. Today, I chatted with someone who I met through a former guest. Rain Parvis was the guest that I met before, and she changed her career from comedian to personal stylist and is an author. And she introduced me to, digitally, August McLaughlin, who is a podcaster as well, a blogger, writer, and the author of the book and founder of the movement Girl Boner. Now do I have your attention? We had a great conversation with such a variety of topics of the different bold moves she's made in her life, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. So, without further ado, here is August McLaughlin. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bold Moves podcast. Today, I am chatting with August McLaughlin. Hello. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mandy. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Now, of course, you know that the show is called Bold Moves, and you wouldn't be on here if you hadn't made some yourself. So why don't you share a little bit about who you are, your story, and some of the risks you've taken that have led you to this moment right now?
Oh, gosh. Okay. So pretty much most of my life, but
That's kind of common. Most people don't just make one bold move and then kind of chill.
Yeah, exactly. It's like one risk leads to another. And so I grew up in Minnesota and in a really awesome family. I'm the middle of 5 kids. And I always had a sense of wanting to adventure around, see other places. And I wasn't quite sure what my sort of purpose or life goals were, but I definitely had that adventurous kind of spirit. I was in high school when I was really involved in theater. That led to some modeling work, and I had already been dealing with a lot of body image issues.
Okay.
So I was kind of attracted to that piece of modeling as well, because it's like a way that I would have to focus on, weight control and all these things. But I also really enjoyed the work. It was a place where I felt confident, where I felt very insecure in my life, as so many teenage girls do. And so probably the biggest risk I took first was I moved to New York City out of high school. Now, it wasn't completely, I didn't go out there with like a backpack and just sort of hope for things to happen. I signed with a really awesome agency out there before I moved. So I did have a place to live and all that kind of stuff, but it was still really scary. Like the first night that I was there, I cried myself to sleep because it was just like the movies. I wanted that culture shock. Yeah. It was really shocking and overwhelming. So sorry, that's my bird. Can you hear the bird?
You can hear the bird, but that's okay. It's special guest.
Okay, yes. I like to make their cameos. We have a zoo around here, I like to say. But yeah, so that was the first one. And then I developed a pretty severe eating disorder and was diagnosed when I was in Paris. And went back to Minnesota. And that whole journey had a lot of boldness involved, but it was in these kind of subtle moments where things like eating breakfast when I was trying to stop the starvation was one of the bravest, scariest things I ever did, which sounds really silly to a lot of people probably, unless you've gone through something like that. But I think that sometimes the quieter, bold moves that we take are the most powerful.
Absolutely.
So I'm very fortunate to have gotten through that illness and recovered. And a big part of my recovery came from embracing my sexuality, which led me to all the work I do today, which is called Girl Boner. And some people tell me that it's pretty bold to shout that term all over the place. I get a lot of joy out of it, so it doesn't really feel like brave to me. but it's really fun. I really enjoy it. I also shifted from modeling to acting to writing, and those kind of big career shifts,
right,
I think can feel pretty bold, when there's no net to catch you and you just kind of go for it. But they've all paid off. I wouldn't say it's been smooth, but it ends up being very rewarding eventually.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to back up because obviously, like you said, there's so many bold moves. I want to kind of unpack a few of them and just get into your story a little bit. First of all, fellow Midwesterner, where in Minnesota are you from?
I was wondering when you started talking, I was like,
My accent
we
pops
are both from the Midwest. And now we probably are going to start sounding really Midwestern because I start to catch it back.
Right.
But the Twin Cities, so a suburb and St. Paul. How about you?
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Oh my gosh. Awesome. Yeah, we're like neighbors pretty much.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have that in common. The second thing is, I guess I'm not that surprised to hear that if you started with issues around disordered eating, that would develop and with confidence. But I was kind of surprised to hear you say that modeling actually made you feel more confident, because I have a modeling background as well. And I feel like the scrutiny, the expectations of agents and so on definitely made me less confident a lot of the time. I guess it depends. There's those moments when you're in a shoot and you're in the zone and you feel on top of the world. And then there's also moments when you're in other shoots and maybe the set environment isn't quite right or the same, where you're like, oh my gosh, I am way overweight. I'm out of my league. What am I doing here? And you have those feelings. So I'm curious about how that kind of all worked both in your favor and I'm assuming against you as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because it definitely did both hugely.
Yeah.
When I was actually doing the work, I felt confident. Okay. When I was before the camera or when I was on the runway or when I was, in the performance pieces of it. Sure. When I was going to see my agents, petrified. When I was hanging out with other models, terrified. I felt like Anne Hathaway's character on Devil Wears Prada she was like the librarian kind of looking person.
Right.
I did not know how to dress myself. I'm still not great at it, which is why I turned to our mutual friend, Rain Parvis, who is amazing. Absolutely. That's not my thing. That's not why I got into fashion whatsoever. So it was very intimidating. And then, yes, there's the increased pressure, which I was attracted to, right? To have to be thin or thinner. But then it perpetuated it because I would lose more weight and I would get more jobs, or I would
reinforcement for a behavior that's not necessarily doing your health any favors.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I kind of cut you off. Were you going to say more?
Okay. No, that was pretty much it. It was interesting how it was very strengthening and also did the opposite. There was no kind of middle ground. I was either feeling like on top of it, or I was really terrified and insecure. And sadly, as happens with eating disorders, is the disorder takes over. Sure. So that itself, separate from the modeling even, started out as an infatuation. Like I compare it to a toxic relationship where you're really smitten at first and everything seems amazing. And you're like, oh, I got this. I'm going to eat these vegetables. I'm going to work out. And it becomes your stalker and won't let you breathe and you can't be yourself. And so I got to the point where I was in Paris at the height of my modeling career in many ways. It's where I've been striving to go. I was working with some of the top agencies in the world. I was meeting with Vogue, like all these things were happening and I didn't care anymore. Like the eating disorder had just taken it all. I would skip a casting or a callback or I think probably shoots. It's all foggy to me now because I was very sick when I was there, but my passion was gone. And that's when you know that it's really severe. So I was fortunate in that it did have to turn around quickly because I kind of hit one of my bottoms pretty fast. And then you only have two choices. Like it ends there or you get back up and you go, I don't know what's out there for me, but I just had this feeling. I even tried to give up a few times. I was like, just let go and just, what is this even about, this whole life thing? And what are you even doing? And I couldn't let go. There was like a light it felt inside me. I guess it was hope. And I'm really glad I stuck it out.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm curious, what was recovery like for you? Did you do it on your own? Did you go to a facility? How did you work through that to get where you are now?
It's a great question. I tried a lot of the conventional things first. I was in therapy. There was like a day program, whatever my insurance would cover. I saw a dietitian. I met with physicians, and therapy was cool in that it was nice to talk to somebody, about all this stuff. But I wasn't really ready to heal. I had thought, I'll go back to Minnesota and I'll give it a month. Like, I'll just spend a month working on this and then I'll be fine. And then I can be, thin and happy at the same time. Like, that was my goal, which is not actually what recovery is about.
I think that's everyone's goal, is to be thin and happy, but yeah.
It's a lot of people's. And I realized too that I was fat shaming a lot back then. I was afraid of something that society tells us is this horrible thing, when really it wasn't about that, it goes so much deeper. But I made some progress in those treatments. For me, the most powerful thing by far, though, was I was sitting in a college classroom and taking classes, because my whole life went from like pretty glamorous big city to living out in like small town Countryville, because I wanted to escape, right? And it was so quiet and I was not comfortable with myself, and all I had was treatment. So I took this class, a women's psychology class, and one day the professor said, we're going to talk about sex. And it was one of those like aha moments where all the lights went on, because I realized I hadn't talked about sex. Not really. Sure. I had sex, never even talked about it to the person I was having sex with. And so I thought, there's something weird about this. And I've pretty much been talking about it ever since. But yeah, that was huge, because what that did was it led me to question all those beliefs I had. Like, why didn't I talk about sex? What did I learn? How come I didn't learn all this other stuff? And without even trying to, I started to value my body in a way I didn't know was possible. Wow. It was really powerful, like pleasure-worthy and beautiful and capable.
I love that. And I feel like that had to assist in your recovery, if you're valuing your body, and instead of trying to control it, but just thinking about it and kind of reimagining it in your own mind had to make a difference.
Oh yeah, it was everything. Because the thing is, before that, I'd had a couple of turning points, and I was physically much healthier by that point.
Excellent.
But emotionally, I was still struggling. I still saw numbers on plates. I saw calories and grams, and I couldn't quite let go of the emotional pieces of it until I stepped into sexual empowerment, which I think bolstered my recovery. And it's the reason I was able to move fully past it. It wasn't instant. It took a while, as it tends to, but I haven't gone back. Like, I haven't had any like urge to diet. Why would I starve or brutalize a body that I care about so much,
I love that so much. So now that brings us, I think, a little bit now to present. And as you mentioned, Rain Parvis is our mutual friend. I haven't actually met her in person. I've just interviewed her for the show. And then, of course, we engage with each other's Instagram. And I love the things that you post, talking about with Girl Boner, which is a book you've written, as well as kind of your podcast, right? And then just a movement that you have. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. So Girl Boner started on my blog about, I guess it's 7 years ago now. I'm so bad at math and chronology, but and I had, again, all of these epiphanies and realized that I was not by far the only person who struggled in that way. Sure. And so I had already become a writer. I built a health writing career and was loving that, and just felt a sense of activism, and thought Girl Boner had been a term that was so dear to my heart for a long time, like an inside joke. And I used it for a very long time. And I thought, I need to do something with this term. And I wanted to write a book, which seemed like the natural, thing as a writer. But I didn't have a background other than just what I had been through myself and what I'd been studying. So I decided to blog about it first. So I started a blog series, and that just changed everything for me. It led to my podcast, Girl Boner Radio, and it did eventually lead to my book contract. So it released just a couple of weeks ago, and my whole life is all about it. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really excited. It's all about embracing your full self and having a lot of fun, embracing pleasure, learning and kind of debunking all these crazy myths that we hear.
So what are some of the crazy myths, or your favorite topics, or things you've learned or explored through Girl Boner and Girl Boner Radio?
Oh gosh, there's so many, but some of the common myths that I still hear a lot are that women are less visual than men, which isn't true, and there was never any study behind that. And so it's interesting because a lot of the myths that we believe, because we've all heard that, right? Like men are the visual ones.
I've not heard that. And that's
really
insane to me, especially as a makeup artist and thinking about the visual things that women, traditional general roles, are in charge of doing, like decorating homes or like, why would anyone believe that?
Right. It sounds silly. I think it comes from the fact that so much of the kind of erotic material that we see is for the straight male gaze, right? Yes. And based on these societal ideals that a lot of women are kind of like, that doesn't make me feel good, so they'd be like, well, that's why they're not watching porn, when in fact, a lot of the time it has more to do with shame. Like we've been taught you can't be a good person or a good woman or a good girl and also have this sexy, spicy, side of ourselves. So that's one. Another is that we peak sexually in our 30s. Have you heard that one?
I've heard that one, yeah. And by we, do you mean women specifically?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so women peaking in our 30s sexually comes from a really small study decades ago. So you can imagine, completely different climate socially in all these different ways. Right. And a very small group of women were self-reporting answers about sex and orgasm. And you can imagine, first of all, they're probably not going to admit to a lot of things, right? This is back in like days where a woman had to be a housewife. Like, it's just a totally different, so it turns into this sort of like telephone game where it gets passed along as a headline and it's not actually true. So what's actually true is that we tend to be really fluid women. Everybody, I think, sexuality is so individual, but it's not like we suddenly peak in our 30s. I think some people feel that way because there's a lot of insecurity in our 20s. I don't know a lot of people who are like, I'm so sure of myself when I'm 25. So that could be part of it. But sexuality and our like orgasms can get stronger, and everything about our sexuality can blossom through our whole lives, which is pretty amazing.
That is absolutely amazing. And thank you for sharing that. And hopefully someone listening is like, oh, cool, about either of those. Yeah.
I hope so.
I love that. So one of the things you posted the other day, which is kind of what gave me the idea to ask you to be on the show, was that a lot of people tried to dissuade you from using the term girl boner, which I think is so fun. And I use similar terms or say like, oh, so-and-so has a boner for this, just non-sexually, but as a way to explain that someone likes something. So why don't you tell me a little bit about that and how and why you decided to stick with the term?
So when I was in fourth grade, I had that really awkward sex ed class.
Yeah.
It's I tell this story in my book early on. So many of us have an experience like this, but mine was, I remember filing into this classroom. Everyone's really like nervous and fidgety. And I was really excited because I'm like, ooh, this is taboo. And I was really into, naughty things, but I had no idea what we were going to learn. And what was so interesting, you have these moments of childhood that just sort of like stay planted in your brain.
Yeah, of course.
This is one of them. So I was sitting there and they have like the projector going and there's slides. And there was a slide of a medical drawing of like a male figure who had a boner. He had an erection. And I was like, what is going on? I had never seen a penis, first of all, maybe a baby penis. I didn't have any recollection of knowing what like a man's penis, a general idea of what it's like shaped like. I didn't know that it could function that way. Right. And I remember thinking like, wow, does that hurt? Can you hang things on it? Like all these thoughts. And then it struck me because the teacher said something about it feeling pleasurable. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah. So that means there must be something really good for girls, right?
Yeah.
And of course, what happens, we click over to the female slides and we see tampons and cramps and then we get to disease. And we never heard anything positive at all for girls or for women. And so when I first heard the term boner on the schoolyard and kind of learned what it meant, my first thought was like, well, what about girl boners? And so it has stuck with me. And there are literally, when I decided to apply for the trademark for girl boner, there were no words in the entire slang dictionary, like a big heavy one, for female pleasure. There were a whole ton of them for guys.
Of course.
And so I thought, okay, I need to like stake my claim. So I filed for the trademark, started it on my blog. And I always loved the term. And I think it says exactly what I'm going for. It's fun. It gives people the idea that it's about excitement and pleasure and sexuality. And the whole good girl thing, it's so funny to me when I tell people upon just first meeting them what I do, and they're like, well, what is it called? And I'm like, girl boner. A lot of times they say, but you seem so nice. And I think
really nice.
Boners are cool too. They're nice. So I think it really fits what I'm doing. And I love people's responses. I've never had anybody, I mean, sometimes people might be a little bit like, oh, what is that? But for the most part, people get excited when they hear it. They giggle. And so I want it to be a fun place for people.
Absolutely. I love that. So in all of this evolution, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground from, darker times to more fun and changing things. I'm wondering, what is like the biggest risk or the scariest moment you've been through so far?
Oh, wow. The scariest moment I've been through so far. That's a hard one.
Or the biggest risk, sometime you've had to push past fear.
Can I share a really recent one? I don't know if it's
of course.
But it's been on my mind. And I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to. I have been feeling so vulnerable about investing money, like more money. I mean, so much of my money I invest into my work. Any entrepreneur is like, I get that. But this journey, especially this point when I'm getting to the book publishing, and I have a traditional publisher, so I'm very lucky. And then a lot of things are covered for me,
right?
But that I still have to expand my trademark, which means hiring the attorney for it. I have to, think about, I don't believe that you have to, spend money to make any money, because a lot of this stuff I've built, it's been for free basically to start out with. I think which is your time, which is arguably, you could call that money, I suppose. But I do think that you have to love what you're doing enough to invest. And not only invest, but invest and know that, and have faith that it's worth it. Because the only reason to expand my trademark is because if the book is, quote, successful, then people piggyback, right?
Right.
If nobody bought it, then I would not have to worry about it, right? So You have to invest before anything happens. And the financial piece has been really strength-inducing. Like I've had to really address old wounds that I didn't even know that I had necessarily around money. So it's really interesting.
That is interesting, because I think for a lot of us, there's money mindset issues, of course. And I think that's one of the fears that some people have of success, is that when they reach a certain level of financial success or abundance, there's a whole new set of problems that there's going to have to be, like taxes, like trusting somebody for help with investing. And then, like you said, you're hoping that you expand beyond a book and your podcast. I don't know what that would mean or what that would be, but the idea that, it's going to be bigger and you got to feed it to let it grow, I can see how that would be scary. Yeah. So how are you pushing past that?
I'm really letting myself feel all those feelings, for one. In the past, especially during like the eating disorder stuff, a lot of times when you have something that, an addiction, which eating disorders involve a lot of that, you have such big feelings. You're a really sensitive person. I'm a very sensitive person, like a lot of writers. And sometimes those feelings feel unbearable and you just don't want to even go there. And I have let myself sob it out and shake and observe these feelings, and then go, now I have the benefit of having, as you do, an audience, right? Mm-hmm. And we want to provide empowering content to our listeners, for my readers. And so I think about things like, what would I want a younger sister, which is kind of how I think of a lot of my listeners, or any woman in my life, what example do I want to set for them? Sure. And so it takes talking things out and, it's been really interesting, but knowing that the more that I take these bold steps and I really face these fears and move forward with it and go, these butterflies are normal and they can be there, but they're just not going to like take over me, it's going to be all right. Just kind of like soothing myself, and self-care is really big. Sure. And something that has been a bit challenging during some of the book launch stuff, because things get so hectic. Right. And actually our friend Rain was one of my self-care options, because actually, this is funny. My therapist told me I had to buy clothes, not because I showed up in like, threads or anything. I was telling her I didn't know if it would be self-care to save money and not buy more clothes, because I hardly ever buy clothes. And I want to invest in my business, like, or take care of my dog. But when it comes to like my kind of frivolous, quote unquote, things, it's hard. Especially as somebody who's always been a bohemian and feast or famine, doing my own thing. Right. You never know what'll happen. I've been broke. And I don't want to go there again. So I thought, is it smart to save or is it smarter to invest? And she was all, I think you need to buy a few pieces. So I texted Rain and I said, so my therapist said that even when I feel broke, blah, 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 blah. I was like, are you free on Monday? So I went to Nordstrom, and it was so dreamy because she had this room set up for me with clothes in my color palette. She'd asked me before what I was looking for. I was like, nothing but wrinkles, because I will never wear it because I do not iron. Like, she was so, and she knows that I'm budget conscious, right? Yeah. So that was a really strengthening thing. And I invested more money than I normally would, but it's made a huge difference. And now when I go to an event, I just don't like thinking about clothes. Right. But I also want to feel good, Sure. I want to feel like authentically me and not feel stressed that, oh my gosh, I look really weird today. And I don't have to do that. So yeah.
Absolutely. I can totally identify with that because I'm in the absolute same boat as, the feast or famine. And when I think about having extra money, or when I or when I get a check or whatever, I often think of that in terms of like, okay, well, I need to redo my website, or I wanted to invest in this service, or like think of what business thing that could go to. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to clothes, I'm like, oh, that much money? Like, no way. I'm just like so much like thinking in how much I can invest it in other parts of my business. But it makes complete sense that, taking out the guesswork in what you should wear and feeling great at an event sounds like that would be invaluable too. So I can totally see that. And I'm curious, I'm glad that you brought that up as an example of how you practice self-care, because I'm wondering what else you do aside from going and seeing Rain and getting great service and style tips.
Yeah. So spending time with friends and loved ones is really big for me, which again can feel a little stressful when you're trying to balance out your schedule, because I also need I'm a people person who needs a lot of alone time. So
going introvert, I'm the same.
Something like that. Yeah. So I end up, if I get really energized by people, mm-hmm. but I really need to, so much of writing is like daydreaming and, having these like unstructured blocks of time. Sure. But I've found that by blocking out time to have lunch with friends, or to do something fun with my husband or whatever, it's really helpful for my soul, to take those times. And you never know. I went to see The Waitress at the Pantages, oh my gosh, the other day. And I was bawling, partly because the storyline fit exactly those kinds of challenges that I was talking about. There's this main character who's struggling and feeling a little bit stuck, and can she get out? And money is a theme. And she ends up just finding her way, and it has this beautiful music. So I'm like crying like a baby in the middle of but it was so great. And afterwards I just felt lighter, so that's a big one. And then I don't work in the evenings because I don't sleep well if I do. I also don't work well in the evening. So it's just my brain's jelly. Anyway. Exactly. Yeah.
I love it. Those are great strategies. I think with musical theater, it's funny because I would never consider myself someone who likes musicals, but I'll like begrudgingly go every once in a while, and I cry every time. And some of it, I think, is just you look at the people and I watch and I imagine all the hours that it took to get to them all coordinated on stage singing and dancing, and it just moves me every time. Like even if I don't like the show or the message, it's still like, oh my gosh, look at all of that hard work at one spot. And it just knocks me down every time to tears.
That's so sweet. You have such a big heart. That's beautiful. Yeah, I feel a sense of that too, partly because I was in theater growing up.
Right.
So there's that nostalgic feeling of being in this, this team of people that feels like a family, and they're all really accepting of each other. And
right.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I'm curious about two things that kind of came up in what you were just explaining for your self-care. One of them is you mentioned that you have a husband, and I'm curious, going along with sort of the whole, oh, but you seem like a nice girl idea. What is your husband's take on girl boner and how that's become part of your life? I guess I don't know how long you've been together and if you're getting into, so to speak, or...
Yeah, so we were already together before I started Girl Boner.
Okay.
But he has been so supportive. And when I told him my idea for, the blog, basically like, I'm going really public with my girl boners. He was like, that is so you. I support, he's just so whatever makes me happy. And one interesting thing though, is he's very, very private, and I talk about everything. Like as you see, my book and on my podcast, I talk about my own sexual experiences, but I don't talk about him. Like I respect his privacy, and we respect each other's uniqueness, which is really cool because different things fill our hearts.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he's been invaluably supportive. I don't know what I would do if I had a partner who was like, ugh, you can't do that, because it's so much a part of my identity. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad that you guys have each other to lean on, and that you found a balance of still being public and comfortable discussing and open, but still respecting boundaries of your relationship. I think that's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. The second question is also another, I guess, more practical question is, do you have a day job, or is Girl Boner funding everything you're doing now?
I write pretty much full time. So I consider Girl Boner pretty much my everything, because most of my writing involves sexuality.
Okay.
But I write for a bunch of different publications, and I still do health writing, sexuality writing, and then Girl Boner is also a huge part of my business too. So it's all kind of under the same umbrella, and increasingly it's all much more related. So when I first started, I was mostly writing about nutrition.
Okay.
And then on my blog, I was writing about girl boners. And so everything is, merged together much more. And then I do some speaking as well. So there are kind of the little, not little, but these, things that come up along the way that I'll take on. But writing and girl boners, pretty much my whole full-time thing.
I love that.
Yeah.
And you brought together, you said you were writing about nutrition, and it's now still health, and it all kind of goes together. Do you have any nutrition tips for improving girl boners?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that, because I have a whole lifestyle section too in my book, and I think it's really important, especially in this day and age of like all these rules, right?
Sure.
About what to eat, what not to eat. My favorite tip is to listen to your body. And if you are looking for a methodology, or you work well with like a guide, I really recommend intuitive eating. You can find, there's a book called Intuitive Eating. There are websites. I've written articles about it. But reconnecting with your body's cues and respecting it instead of fighting hunger, respecting that and getting more in tune is really big. And then it depends on where you're at. Obviously, if you are, because I used to work with a lot of people with eating disorders, I taught nutrition therapy for about 8 years. And if you're in the thick of an eating disorder, it's a very different thing, right? Listening to your body is virtually impossible. So you have to start where you are and just think like, what's one step I can take, seek support if you need it. But yeah, I'm really against restriction. I'm for whatever people want to do with their, with their own choices and eat what you want. If you want to do a certain diet, do it. But my wish for everyone is that they don't live in a state of deprivation which is where so many of our health and wellness and psychological problems come from, no matter your shape or size. It's universal. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. It seems like you've covered a lot of ground you look young, so I don't know how old you are, but from teaching nutrition, writing, acting, modeling, all over the place. If you don't know the answer, it's totally fine that you say so, but I'm curious if you know your purpose, and if you do know it, what it is.
I really feel like Girl Boner is my purpose. Honestly, when I think about being in Paris when I was really, really sick,
Sure.
I was diagnosed with anorexia there, and I had gone for a morning run and I collapsed, which had happened before.
Mm-hmm.
But that particular time I didn't get up right away, and it was really, really touch and go there. And that feeling of like, I can't let go, there's something. Yeah. Nothing has felt as aligned with that as Girl Boner. So I feel that wherever it leads me, I didn't know it was going to lead me beyond writing. I didn't know that I would be doing any sort of show or any of that. But it does. Actually, I've never wanted children. It feels like my child. I have a daughter named Girl Boner.
Oh, so cute.
I do feel a sense of like a very nurturing sense about it and a responsibility. Yeah.
Okay. So how would you define Girl Boner as a purpose then? What is the mission of Girl Boner?
The mission is to encourage everyone, no matter your gender, your shape, or your size, or your age, or your religious beliefs, or your economic status, any of that, for people to know that they are worthy of pleasure, that their sexuality is valid and embraceable, that exactly the way you are, and your sexuality, even the parts you don't know about yet and you're confused about, it's all right. And there's so much more beauty and strength there. It's not about sex. Sex is a piece of it, but it's about so much more. Our sexuality is in the air that we breathe and the words that we say and music and food. And it's this huge, gorgeous part of ourselves. And I feel like it's still really hard for a lot of people, understandably, to fully embrace that. So that's my biggest goal.
I love that. That's beautiful. And you can definitely hear your passion when you're describing it. And it's breathtaking how much you can convey that in just a couple sentences.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very grateful. I'm grateful to be able to do this, because I know in some countries
oh my gosh,
not be allowed. I'll say that in the nicest way possible. But yeah, it's fortunate. And I feel lucky also for all the people who've paved the way for anybody to talk about sex or sexuality publicly, and especially for women to be able to do this kind of work. We stand on so many people's shoulders.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great segue. I don't know what book recommendations you have. Of course, everyone should read Girl Boner, and that's a recommendation, but for those watching instead of listening, you just saw the cover. It matches and it's purple, which I love, so it's all perfect. But what, aside from Girl Boner, would you recommend for anyone? I guess it could be, just for fun reading. It could be maybe some of the people's shoulders you stand on, as you mentioned, related to Girl Boners or sexual empowerment, sexuality, or just anything that, you think would add value. What are your recommendations?
I'll tell you about my two favorite books.
Okay.
They aren't directly Girl Boner specific, but I think they relate in a way. So one is The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. Are you familiar?
I'm not, but I'm very intrigued by the title, especially given the topic of my podcast. Yeah,
exactly. So Gavin de Becker, he works with the CIA, essentially, helping them determine whether somebody is a risk or not. Okay. And he's a genius, almost like I don't know if you use the word savant, but he just is really brilliant with all of this stuff. So he wrote this book, and it is about trusting your instincts, but so much more. And it shares so many different stories of people, all walks of life, different genders, everything, who saved themselves from a really dangerous situation or just a really annoying situation. And I read that book after this guy had sent me flowers. He shouldn't have known where I lived.
Oh,
I had just moved into this guest house, like behind a house.
okay.
And he knew to have it delivered all like to that door. And he gave me his
yeah.
phone number. And my initial reaction, and this was maybe 10, 12 years ago, my initial reaction was, oh, I should call and say, oh, I'm so sorry, but I'm seeing somebody. And my husband, my now, or then boyfriend, he said, you know, I support whatever you want to do, but you might want to check this book out. And I read it and was like, oh my God, like I saw my whole life differently. It is really groundbreaking, and it helped me see that, you know, sometimes the best response is nothing.
I was going to say, so what did you do instead? You just ignored it?
I ignored it. Yeah.
Okay.
Because if he had been a dangerous person,
Yeah.
then any attention is attention.
Okay.
If he just is some guy with good intentions, but
doesn't have social skills to know that that's creepy.
Yeah, exactly. Then he's a good person. He'll let it go. And I think that's probably what happened. I don't know, but I didn't have to find out. I just didn't respond. So I highly recommend that. It also prompted me to take this self-defense class that he recommends called Impact, which is incredible.
Okay.
And I recommend that as well. And then there's another book. It's a memoir by Susanna Cahalan, and it's called Brain on Fire. You heard of that?
I think actually my best friend has read that. I've heard of it. I don't remember what it was about, but I remember her telling me about it. So please bring us up to speed. So first of all, I love thrillers, and this has a very suspenseful psychological thriller feel to it. Okay. I also love true stories, and I love when people take their hardships and do something positive with it. And this has all of those elements. But essentially, there's a journalist, Susanna, and she is in New York City, and she has this like cool job for a big paper, and she starts to develop these like bizarre symptoms, essentially. It starts with her thinking that she has bed bugs, but she actually doesn't. And I don't want to give it all away, but she ends up just going through this. I mean, basically she goes through madness. And I think I might also connect to it because anorexia also takes you to a state of madness. Like physically, cognitively, you see things that are not there. So I kind of relate to that piece in a certain way. But the way that Susanna has used her journey to help people and save people's lives is just gorgeous. That sounds really interesting. And I'm pretty sure that my best friend that read it is a clinical psychologist. Psychologist. So falls right into the things that she would be reading. So that sounds really good. And I'm going to have to download that soon. So thank you.
Cool. I'd love to hear what you think of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm going to put those links to those books in the show notes, and I would like to include the self-defense class that you talked about. So can you send me a link to where people can find that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's a video for one of my graduation fights on my Instagram if you want to see. I mean, you literally... It's hardcore. Like some of the instructors, they wear this armor basically. You can hit them as hard as you can. They won't get hurt. Okay. And it's really good to know that you can do that. You probably won't ever need to, but
right.
Yeah.
I love that. So yeah, if you could send the link to that too, I'd love to see it. I'm sure the listeners, readers, viewers would love to see that too. So if they add that to the list, I'd love it. Now, of course, I'm going to link to Girl Boner, but can you tell us all where to find you online, social media, websites, all of that, your podcast, of course, too. And of course, I'll put it in the notes, but if anybody's listening while they run or drive or something and wants to just hear it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So it's Girl Boner, the Good Girl's Guide to Sexual Empowerment. If you search for Girl Boner on Amazon, it should pop up.
Okay.
It's also available at Barnes & Noble, in the store, on the website, and you can either request it or find it at your favorite like indie bookstore as well. Sure. And you can also find me and all of my links, social media and all that, at augustmclaughlin.com. If it's easier to remember, girlboner.org. You can find me there. I love hearing from people. So if anyone does read the book or listen to Girl Boner Radio is on all of the podcast outlets. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify.
Love it. Well, thank you for that. And like I said, that will be in the show notes so that people can find that as well. I'm curious, you've given great book recommendations and even just talking about your story, how you push past fear, and all of the things you've shared has given, I think, a lot of value to anyone who's listening. Are there any other tips, lessons, advice, something maybe you've learned recently you wish you would have learned sooner, or anything else that you think I'd really like to pass this on to the viewers or listeners that you'd like to share?
Oh gosh, I would say every change that we go through, whenever we want to grow in some area, it starts with self-awareness. So asking ourselves questions. We are our own best expert. We are the genius of our own selves. Even we don't think we know the answer. A lot of times we do. So it's one reason that throughout my book, I have journal prompts and questions at the end of each section. If there's any area of your life that you're trying to work on, I think that journaling can be a really powerful place where you can write freely without judgment, or fear that someone else is going to see it. And then also, I think setting boundaries is really important. So if that's something that you struggle with, and when you hear that, you go, oh, I don't know, that might be something to think about a little bit more, because I've learned more and more about that throughout this journey. And I know that if I did not set boundaries along the way, there's no way I'd be able to do the work that I do, because we can't please everybody.
Sure.
And we have to honor ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. If someone's hearing that and they're not sure exactly what you mean by setting boundaries, do you have any examples of maybe boundaries you've set in the past and have had great results from that before?
Yes, many. So when I was kind of toward the end of my acting career, though I didn't know it yet, I was about to have that epiphany that I wanted to be writing full time. But when I was acting, and I'd been kind of doing a lot of social stuff at night because I thought I was supposed to, and hanging out with people who were really lovely people, but we weren't really like-minded, or like our conversations felt really weird and fakey. We just didn't connect. And I'm sure they probably felt the same way. It was like, why are we all doing this? I just felt, and I still like these people, but it dawned on me one day that, if I'm going out at night and I'm doing something just because I think I'm supposed to, that's taking away from something else. Yeah. And that probably contributed to my whole making my night a really evening sacred time for me. Yeah. I think that's really, really important. And everybody has different boundaries that they need to set. But I think it starts with that kind of discomfort. And then it's usually when there's discomfort associated with something you're doing for other people. Yeah. And inevitably, it's standing in the way of some area of growth for yourself that if you allow it to flourish, you can actually help so many more people than you realize. So it's not about being selfish. It's about being really true to yourself.
I love that. I think that for some reason right now in our culture, especially it seems with women, it could be for men too, and I just am not aware of it, but it seems like so many people are being martyrs, and, they put off self-care because they feel selfish. I think I hear about it a lot with moms especially too. And I think there's starting to be awakening where people are realizing how important it is to, I guess, put on your own oxygen mask first, or the idea that you can't pour from an empty cup, which is so refreshing. And I hope that people start, giving themselves more love and attention in that way.
It's really true. And it can be so small, self-care can be something really basic. If you're struggling with depression, sometimes I'm going to brush my teeth today. It's something, it's really prioritizing yourself and putting you on that whole priority list, whether it's for 5 seconds or 5 hours or whatever you can manage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like it's also now with the self-care, I guess, revolution, it seems like there's a lot of people who think it's always a bubble bath or something, and it doesn't have to be that big or small. So that's great. Yeah,
it doesn't have to be something you can post on Instagram. I think sometimes people think it has to be really beautiful aesthetically or something. Yeah. A lot of my self-care is like lately, my favorite self-care has been sitting in my car in between busy things and eating a donut and drinking Diet Dr. Pepper, listening to the radio, or texting a friend.
Yeah. I could see where that
that times recently, and both times I was like, this feels so amazing. And it's the simplest thing. But yeah, it's something that, makes your heart happy.
I love that. That's, I think, a great definition for self-care. And that's, again, another great segue to my very last question, which is my favorite one to ask. So if 8-year-old August in Minnesota had a crystal ball and could look to the future, to right now, and all the girl boners you've had and that you will have, because of course, this foreseeable future, you probably know maybe the next couple weeks or even further what you plan to do. On a scale of 1 to 11, how excited would little August be to see where you are now?
On 1 to 11?
1 to 11.
Oh my gosh. At least an 11 for sure. I'm glad you picked the age 8 because I was really, really happy then. And a few years got really wonky for me. And then I went through a lot of struggle for quite some time. So if I could tell that girl, not only is it going to be an 11 plus and really awesome, but just to assure her that no matter how dark things get, things are going to get better than you ever imagined. Just do not give up. Like that voice inside you, that hope that flickers, you have to trust.
I love that. I love that so much. And I think 8 is about the time that you were talking about with the awkward sex ed class.
It was close. Yeah. I think that was a little bit after that, but yeah, it was very close for sure. So maybe that was like a little psychic thing that happened. It was like a seed was planted and yeah, in your future.
You may know this, but I'm wondering how much has changed in sex ed since then, if maybe they're starting to be a little bit more, I'm sure it varies, place.
Yeah. It does vary, but it's actually not that different. So I was in sex ed in like the 90s, right?
Right.
And I have asked people, hundreds of people, age 20 to 70, what they learned. And there's not a whole lot of difference, actually. And sex education is only required, I think it's in 24 states in our country. And in those states that do provide it, it is not required to be scientifically or medically accurate. Yeah.
Oh, and no wonder there's crazy myths like women aren't visual.
Right. All these weird things are like, boys think about sex every this many seconds and all these weird things, right? Sorry, a bunch of hoo-ha. If you guys want to know the truth, I've got a lot of answers for you around. But yeah, it's really unfortunate. There's a lot of grassroots movements for sex ed and hopefully that will change. But you really have to seek it out. So parents out there, it's really important to educate yourselves and because most people did not learn anything themselves. So it's kind of hard to teach a kid, like, when do I talk about it? And it should be lifelong and age appropriate. But I hope we get there someday.
I hope so too. Well, August, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and so many great tips, advice, and inspiration. I've really appreciated and loved having you on the show.
Thank you, Mandy. You're such a great host. This was really fun, and I love what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. As I said, we definitely covered a broad range of topics, and I'm so grateful to August for being so open and for sharing so much. I think that these are conversations that are definitely overdue, and hopefully her message gets out to even more people. If you want to check out those show notes that I mentioned, please head over to www.mandiem.com/episode 197. That's where you'll be able to find a link to her blog, her podcast, her book, Girl Boner, all things Girl Boner, and of course the other books and the self-defense class that she recommended. So hopefully you head there. Also, make sure you subscribe to this podcast so that you get either a notification or an automatic download when new episodes come out, because, spoiler alert, there's a new episode coming out this Friday that you won't want to miss, which is a challenge from August that'll hopefully get you a little bit outside of your comfort zone and closer to your wildest dreams. Of course, I would also love it if while you're subscribing, you left a 5-star review and that you shared this episode and any other episodes that you found value in, because if you found value in it, of course, your friends, family, social media followers, etc. will also find value in it. And my goal is to inspire as many people as I possibly can to build their confidence and go after their dreams. And the more people who hear this podcast, the more people I can potentially inspire. So I would absolutely love your help with that, going ahead and sharing it. And then, of course, leaving reviews on iTunes so that Apple starts telling people that this is a podcast worth listening to. I would really appreciate it. All right. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, be bold and have a sparkly day. Bye-bye.